Hi, my name is DevynRamModel, and today we're going to be talking about the optimal diet for a type 2 diabetic. Now, this diet might actually work really well for anyone, including a type 1 diabetic or a person of normal health, but some of the things I'm going to be discussing in this lecture are more relevant to type 2 diabetics, but stay tuned if you're anyone. So I guess the question that I get the most from diabetic people would be, why, as a diabetic, do I need to watch my diet, watch my nutrition if I'm already medicine controlled and I can eat whatever I want? You can, but the real short answer to that would be that it's a lot more cost effective, firstly, to start controlling your diabetes nutritionally than to eventually need more and more insulin. If you can avoid being on extra medication, that should always be your first goal. And secondly, it allows you to have more independence from the healthcare field. You want to be able to say, I'm taking care of me and I'm preventing myself from getting, more higher risk of heart disease or renal problems or eyesight loss, circulation, etc., because I took things into my own hands. Now, I guess the next point I want to get into is, what does a diet like that look like? Now, really, it's mostly related to things you've probably heard before, keeping your sugars low and your fats moderate and sticking to whole foods and unprocessed things. But let's get into that a little bit more. Let's start with sugars. Of course, that's the first thing you're supposed to look at, and it is, as a diabetic, type 1 or 2, but we'll get into type 1 another time. The reason why you want to avoid high sugar foods and super simple sugars is that they raise your blood sugar much more rapidly, and that's going to cause a hyperinsulin response. It could cause you to crash later. You want to stick with sugars that are contained naturally in foods, such as your fruits, your whole grains, your starchy vegetables, because not only are they going to contain more complex carbohydrates, and they're going to contain less overall sugar than your processed foods. They're also going to contain a copious amount of fiber generally, and fiber is going to slow that sugar release. Now, on the other hand, whenever you're looking at simple sugars such as candies, snack cakes, etc., a lot of times they contain sugars that are extremely concentrated and reduced to their simplest form. So they're going to hit your bloodstream and just it's going to be a mess. And they don't really contain a lot of fiber to slow that release down, so you're going to spike up really high and then you're going to crash down really low, and there's not going to be anything to maintain your levels. You want to add to that sugar an equivalent amount of protein. However, you want to stick to proteins that are largely plant-based or are very lean, because you want to avoid high saturated fat content as well. Saturated fat can cause an insulin resistance due to altering metabolic effect on your pancreatic beta cells, which, to put simply, just means your beta cells aren't going to function in the same way that they're supposed to, which means you may not be able to have as much insulin actually reach your cells so that they can take in the sugar that you're eating and create ATP or energy, cellular energy, from that sugar. So it's going to be just sitting in your bloodstream and then it's going to be excreted out. Saturated fat is also really dangerous in terms of risk factors for heart disease, fatty liver syndrome, which, if you have a fatty liver, it's not going to be able to take up as much sugar from that blood either and store it as glycogen, which is the form of sugar that we keep in our bodies, which is about 10% of what we eat. So it can really do a lot of things. It can, I mean, obviously it can raise your cholesterol, it can clog your arteries, but it can also affect your diabetes directly. So you want to avoid those things. You want to stick to, you know, your olive oils, your avocado, your nuts, you know, unsaturated fats, or if you're going to eat, you know, animal products, stick to the leaner ones for that purpose. So to recap, I guess I'm going to nail down a general diet here. You want to stick to your high fiber foods, starchy vegetables, whole grains, you know, none of that white bread unless it's enriched with lots of fiber. Fruit, if you need some sugar, fruit. Avoid processed foods, especially those that have potassium. That can also affect your blood sugar. We can get into that another time. You want to stick to lean proteins, vegetable, plant-based proteins if you can, and unsaturated fats. Avoid saturated fats, simple sugars, and processed foods. And I'm not saying that to be preachy. There's a scientific reason why medical professionals tell you to do that. Okay? Now, if you want any more information on this kind of diet, I would highly recommend speaking to your physician or a registered dietitian, which I will be soon, but I'm not yet. Or maybe just look online for diabetic recipes. To get started, you want to really talk to somebody to figure out what specifically is going to work for you. Whether it be low carb, moderate fat diet, you want something that's going to be customized. Don't just stick with, you know, the paleo diet and then that's it, because it might not work for you as well as you think. Everyone's different. So do your research, read your nutrition labels. If it says it's more than 10% of your saturated fat or your sodium or your sugar, don't eat it. If it says it has any added sugar, I would really avoid it, honestly, at all. And if you have any more questions that you would like to ask for me specifically, I'm always available, so please feel free to ask, and I look forward to hearing from you guys, and take care of yourselves. Thanks.